This lovely manhwa is titled Bitten by the Dog I Abandoned. If you love stories like this, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. In the Duchy of Winter, her lady stood with a bloody sword in her hand. People all around murmured about him being her favorite servant, but it turned out he was just a toy anyway. Kneeling before her was her servant, his body covered in injuries. She looked at him like trash and called him an arrogant man, telling him to try talking again if he could. He groaned in pain, saying she once said she loved him before falling flat to the ground. The people around were shocked, whispering that the rumors were actually true. She laughed loudly at the word love, asking everyone if they truly believed that. She mocked them, asking if they thought she was naive or stupid. She concluded that he must have forgotten his place just because she played with him for a while. In a mocking tone, she told him he was nothing but a leech. 10 years later, a man and a maid were holding each other lustfully. The man argued about doing such a thing here, but the maid replied that if she found out before she could finish, he shut her up, saying everyone was busy. The maid reminded him of the witch's personality, but he pushed her against the wall, opening her buttons and kissing her neck with seductive eyes. She softly asked why he kept doing this again and again. Glaring at the wedding picture on the wall, he said it was because she was blonde and had a sexy back. She immediately interrupted, calling him a pervert. He looked at the picture again and said that one day that pretty face would be distorted too. Just then, the door suddenly burst open. It seemed they had been caught by the witch after all. Madam entered. Both of them froze in shock, caught in that position. Evelyn Winter, the head of the Winter family. The two were forced to the ground. The maid, trembling with tears in her eyes, begged for mercy, saying she had committed a deadly sin. Evelyn reached out her hand and her attendant opened a box containing a gun. Her lady said it was ridiculous to ask to be spared after admitting it was a deadly sin. She pointed the gun at them and asked if they would rather slowly freeze to death in the snow or be killed with a single shot. Which choice was better? "Please save me, matriarch. I won't do it again," the maid pleaded. Meanwhile, the man arrogantly said that her death would damage the Duke's reputation. Evelyn's attendant bowed to her lady, then stepped down the stairs and kicked the man who was still blabbing as he fell. The man tumbled down the stairs as hard as they had intended. "You worry about my honor to this extent? If that's the case, then for the glory of winter, will you just keep your mouth shut and die?" she asked as she was about to pull the trigger. The two of them knew they would die if they stayed and begged. They immediately began to run, cursing at her and shouting if she truly thought her name would protect her for long. With a cold expression, she fired the bullet and told them to go to hell. At the terrace, she handed the gun back to her attendant, complaining that the margin of error was too large and that he should tell them to focus more on shell casing production instead. He informed her that her departure would be delayed because the sea was frozen. She asked if it would take a day or two, then told him to give some coins to the workers. He bowed and answered yes. Just then, the door opened from behind, and a little girl appeared, even though the maid had asked her not to go out. "Sherry?" her lady called. The maid immediately apologized for the noise. Evelyn rushed to the little girl and asked if she was scared. She lifted the child into her arms, smiling gently, and asked if the gunshot frightened her. Sherry replied that a wolf had appeared, but they chased it away. Evelyn walked off with Sherry in her arms, leaving the maid behind. She asked what Sherry had drawn in her book. Sherry replied that she drew a flower. Her lady asked where she had seen such a flower, since none like it grew around here. Sherry chuckled, and Evelyn called her smart. She asked if Sherry would give it to her. As Evelyn stared at the little girl's drawing, she was taken back 10 years earlier to the garden where her servant boy handed her a carved blue flower. He said he carved it at the atelier where her lady allowed him to work and that he had asked permission to make it for her. "But if you don't like it, I can throw it away," he said, hiding his bandaged fingers behind his back. Evelyn was pleased and told him it was pretty, leaving the innocent boy surprised. "It's a pity there's no scent," she said as she pretended to smell it. He told her that one day he would bring her a flower with a scent. With a sad face, he said he would get her a real one. But it was too bad. She dealt with him before he could ever do that. Days later, in the Winter Duchy, a flag was raised under royal decree. One of the commanders stepped forward, saying there was suspicion of a route opening and that illegal military supplies were involved. Therefore, everyone in the Duke's mansion was ordered to cooperate. The servants were dragged out, left confused when they were told not to leave the grounds. They could not believe they were being accused of treason. Evelyn struck her staff against the floor, startling everyone, and told them firmly not to make a fuss. If anyone tarnishes the family's reputation with reckless behavior, that person will not be forgiven, she said before turning away and ordering the maid to bring her usual drink. Through the window, Evelyn noticed Gilas Black and glared at him as he stared back while smoking. Then she looked away. Monarchy Altaric. Altaric stood with the powerful military strength of the royal family, surviving between many powerful nations. Yet the common people continued to bleed due to frequent wars. In a world where the boundaries between the old and the new had become blurred because of industrial growth, dissatisfaction with the royal family and nobility deepened. At this time, a hero appeared like a comet. Gilas Black, whose origin was unknown, was known as a black beast, a ghoul of the battlefield, yet he always won. He rose from a commoner to a war hero and became the people's hope and the future of Altaric. While facing the window, Gilas asked where Rowan Winter was. Evelyn, who sat behind him with a drink in her hand, played dumb and asked who he was talking about. Gilas replied that he was asking about her husband's whereabouts. Evelyn rudely asked if he was blind and how an idiot who could not even read had become a hero. Gilas's subordinate was furious and was about to speak, but Gilas gave him a signal to stay quiet. He continued with his main discussion, saying that although Rowan Winter was recorded as dead in the investigation report, his body was never found. Evelyn, still holding her teacup, stared at him in shock and asked if he had dug up her husband's grave. Gilas continued reading the report, admitting his words might sound rude, but there were more than one suspicious situation. She had married Rowan Winter 10 years ago, but after 3 years, he was involved in a tragic train accident. What troubled him was that there were no witnesses to the accident, and it made no sense. Not even a trace of his body was found. After that, the flow of funds over the past 7 years did not match the ledger. With his head held high and his eyes fixed on her, he asked directly if Rowan Winter was faking his death and secretly planning treason. Evelyn was stunned at first, then suddenly burst out laughing. She said she wondered what nonsense he was talking about and that he should have become a novelist instead of a soldier. Gilas stepped on the papers and moved closer, asking why had she stayed single for over 7 years when there would have been many chances to remarry. Her lady slowly replied, "It's because she still loved him." Gilas froze for a moment, then couldn't hold back his laughter. "The devil's love," he said, adding that her husband should have been the novelist instead. Evelyn stood up and, with her teacup, poured the remaining tea over his head, showing no fear at all. Gilas's subordinate was shocked and immediately tried to step forward. Evelyn coldly asked if he thought she would be scared just because he brought soldiers and blocked her residence to threaten her. "Bring proper evidence," her lady said, while staring straight into his eyes, telling him to stop insulting her dead husband. She let go of the cup, letting it fall to the ground, and walked away with grace. When she reached the door, she told him she was not free and that he should leave at once. Climbing up the stairs as she was about to leave, Evelyn was surprised when she saw Sherry. "Sherry, did I scare you?" she asked worriedly, telling her not to be afraid. However, Sherry refused to come closer because Gilas was standing behind Evelyn. "Madam," Gilas called out. Her lady turned around in shock. "There's something I didn't mention," he said, but Evelyn immediately told him she did not want to hear it. He replied that it was something she had to hear. He explained that a large number of weapons bearing the Winter family seal had been seized while being smuggled to an enemy country. If she could not prove the truth, then she would have to prepare for execution. Evelyn grinned slightly, saying his threats were old-fashioned. She pointed her staff at his chest and told him to cry and beg like before. Gilas recalled 10 years ago when he knelt before her, begging for her love with tears in his eyes. This woman was truly a devil. "Maybe recalling old memories will give you the answer," she said. Suddenly, he grabbed the staff from her hands and pulled her close to him, startling her. Sherry was terrified at the sight. Gilas reminded Evelyn, while holding her so close to his chest, that the child was still young and that she should be careful with her behavior. He slowly let go of her and said they should take a break for today. He told her he would see her again tomorrow. Sherry clung tightly to her mother while Evelyn stood still. Gilas walked away. Her staff lay abandoned on the ground. Indeed, the dog she raised was now biting her deeply. The Duchy of Winter was one of Alteric's founding contributors and its most loyal vassal. The family was granted land in the north and gained great wealth through mining and military industries. However, blinded by money, the Duke's family did not hesitate to use illegal means to expand their business. They were cursed and hated by the people for their crimes. To remove the shame from the Winter family, Rowan, the youngest person to graduate from the academy at the top of his class, was adopted into the family and named Patriarch. But after only 3 years, he disappeared. The only one left behind was his wife, Evelyn Winter. Instead of breaking down from the sorrow of losing her husband, she continued the cruel business expansion. Like husband, like wife. People gossiped about how cruel and heartless she was, and claimed she would ruin the family, but she only laughed behind the scenes. However, the Winter family's business, which once seemed endless, began to slow down. There was no rightful successor left, and the prestige of the duchy slowly collapsed. The next day, during the meeting, Colonel Gilas left Evelyn in shock when he offered to buy her name and territory. "What did you say?" she asked in disbelief as her cup fell from her hand. He explained that she would be freed from all responsibilities, including confiscated assets from the mine room. She could not believe it and called it ridiculous, asking if he thought she was broke and desperate for money. He calmly replied that gold production had greatly dropped. As long as she carried the stigma of smuggling weapons to an enemy country, future profits could not be guaranteed. He handed her several files, saying it was better to end things now. "It seems you have found a strong backing," she said as she stood up. She wiped her mouth and remarked that he was no longer someone she could confront easily. Evelyn asked if he was worried about her and mocked how generous he was being. Gilas took out a cigarette, preparing to smoke, and told her to simply sign the papers. In response, her lady slammed the files down and stepped close to him, saying the only one who could show her mercy was the Emperor. She clenched her teeth and demanded to know how dare he question her judgment, or if he believed himself above the king's authority. Evelyn angrily called for her assistant, Isaac, telling him to pack their bags. She declared that she would request a private audience with His Majesty the King. As she walked out, she announced that at sunrise they would head straight to the royal castle. Later that night, Evelyn sat beside the window, staring at the dark night sky. She suddenly grabbed her dress in annoyance as she thought about his words earlier, muttering to herself that if he thought she would let him take everything away like this, he was wrong. Cherry quietly approached from behind and hugged her. Startled, Evelyn turned in anger, yelling to ask who it was, only to see it was Cherry. Her expression softened instantly. She gently pulled her close, calmly asking if she was hurt and telling her not to cry. But Cherry cried anyway. Moments later, Evelyn held the innocent girl tightly in her arms and let out a deep breath of relief once she finally calmed down. She looked at her sleeping daughter and whispered that no one could ever take her away, because she was the owner of Winter. Both of them fell asleep in the chair. Later, Cherry awoke and saw that her mother was still sleeping. Thinking she should get a blanket for her, she carefully climbed down and rushed out of the room. Just then, Gilas walked in with a plate in his hands. He stood there staring at Evelyn as she slept soundly, softly calling out the name Rowan in her sleep. His expression darkened as he shouted for her to wake up. Evelyn opened her eyes and saw him standing before her. He placed the food in front of her, telling her to eat or she might collapse since she had not eaten all day. She turned her face away, calling it a terrible bribe. Why was he offering her food? He was no longer her servant, was he? Gilas suddenly held her face, which shocked her. "As expected, you have a fever," he said, asking if it hurt when she swallowed food. Evelyn quickly slapped his hand away, demanding to know what he was doing. He replied that even in the past, whenever she felt unwell, she would refuse to eat. She sighed and asked what he really wanted, or if he had come to take revenge. "Revenge?" he repeated, saying he was not sure that was the right word. He leaned closer, lifting her chin, and said revenge only works on a worthy opponent. He slid a spoonful into her mouth, saying it was not meant for someone as weak as she is now. Evelyn angrily knocked the spoon in his hand away. In response, he grabbed her again, one hand pressing against her neck, making her groan in pain. "Try to shake me off," he said coldly, adding that I thought you were full of energy earlier when you claimed you would go to the palace. Since the spoon was gone, Gilas said there were still many ways to feed her. He lifted her chin again, and the two stared into each other's eyes as he pressed his fingers between her lips. He warned not to resist. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock as memories of their past intimacy flooded her mind. Lost in those memories, she failed to react as he forced the food into her mouth. She struggled to pull away, but he held her tightly, telling her to drop her stubborn pride and accept what he was giving her. He said it did not look bad on her to live like this. Evelyn suddenly coughed, spitting out the food. At that moment, Gilas noticed Cherry standing behind them, her small body shaking with anger, as if she would tear him apart if he moved any closer to her mother. Gilas finally let go and turned away, telling Evelyn to finish the rest of the food. If she refused, he warned that she would be treated like a burden when they went to the palace. Cherry rushed to Evelyn's side, clinging to her in worry. Evelyn glared at Gilas with deep hatred as he walked away. Flashback to 10 years ago, when Gilas and Evelyn were stuck during a hunt because of heavy rain. Their hands brushed against each other, and Gilas immediately pulled his hand away. Evelyn glanced at him and noticed he was blushing hard, his cheeks bright red, his hair falling over his eyes. Avoiding eye contact, he begged her to stay where she was, saying he would go get help. But her lady grabbed his hand and asked if he was really going to leave her alone in the forest. "It's because I'm worried you might catch a cold," he said nervously. Evelyn calmly pointed out that his body was actually warmer than hers. Before he could reply, she lifted her hair away from his eyes and told him to look at her properly when speaking. She casually suggested that he cut his hair since it was getting messy. Gilas was too shocked to speak. Then Evelyn suggested they hurry and go together, because she could not stay there alone. "Jill, please stay with me. This is an order," she said with a firm expression. After hearing that, Gilas could no longer keep eye contact. Evelyn added that he should not forget that he belonged to her and was the only asset she owned. She leaned closer, brushing her lips near him, amused at how easily he obeyed and how clumsy his movements were. He was silly, and it was pretty. The next morning, Evelyn was informed that the carriage meant to take her to see the Emperor was broken. The carriage rider bowed and apologized, saying it was perfectly fine the night before. Evelyn muttered to herself that just when she needed to leave quickly, this had to happen. At that moment, Gilas opened the door of his own carriage and asked what she was waiting for. He told her the seat was empty and invited her to take a ride. Evelyn was speechless. She turned away and asked the servant how long the repair would take. He replied it would take about 3 hours. Immediately, she turned back toward the mansion, declaring she would leave in 3 hours instead. Gilas glanced at her, and before she could react, he grabbed her hand and lifted her into his arms. He carried her straight toward the carriage. Evelyn could not believe he dared to do this in public. She demanded to know what he was doing. With a cold and firm expression, he told her they were not going on a leisure trip and that she should cooperate or he would shove her inside. Evelyn struggled and reminded him that many eyes were watching, but he refused to let go. She began hitting him in anger. Everyone watched in shock as she kept striking him. His colleagues cursed under their breath, but Gilas did not flinch at all. Ignoring her tantrum, he threw her into the carriage and told her it would be better if she properly understood the current situation. Evelyn glared at him furiously as he asked who was the one that had to beg now. Inside her mind, she wondered, was this really the same boy she once knew? The carriage began to move, and the two of them sat quietly across from each other. Gilas broke the silence, saying he was relieved that she had regained her energy, which meant the meal from yesterday had done its job. "Don't talk nonsense," Evelyn snapped in annoyance. "It's so disgusting that I feel like throwing up." Gilas glanced at her quietly while reading the documents in his hand. He then took out his suitcase, saying the papers might dirty the carriage, so it would be better to put them inside the case. Evelyn was furious. The moment he brought it closer, she kicked the suitcase with her shoe. "Now that a nosy brat like you, who lived such a rough life, has gained a title, your arrogance has reached the sky. In the past, you couldn't even look me in the eyes." Gilas slowly bent down and picked up the suitcase she had kicked to the ground. Calmly, he said that perhaps he really had been like that in the past. Evelyn was surprised. No matter what she did, she could not provoke him. She couldn't find even a trace of the boy he used to be. Just then, she noticed a scar on his head. A memory from 10 years ago had flashed in her mind when she had struck him with her staff because he clung to her in public, begging her not to abandon him. He had admitted he was wrong and kept holding on to her, but Evelyn had been furious at the watching crowd and hit him hard. Blood had spilled from his head. Now, that wound had become a scar. Her lady slowly reached out her hand to touch that spot. Gilas immediately grabbed her wrist and glared at her coldly. "What do you think you were doing?" Seeing how cold he had become, she struggled and pulled her hand back, saying she was only brushing dust off his head. "To think you would grab a lady's hand just because you were startled," she said through clenched teeth. "Your master must have allowed you to develop such bad habits." Gilas replied firmly that it was not her place to say such things. At that moment, the carriage door opened. One of Gilas's men saluted and announced that they had arrived and would escort her lady to the chamber. Gilas put on his cap and said this was not the time to talk about the past, so they should leave it for another day. He stepped out first. As Evelyn was about to follow, he reached out his hand to help her down. She glanced at it and, of course, ignored it. "That disgusting past isn't worth mentioning," she said as she walked away. They moved through the hallway in silence until they encountered Victor Altaric, second in line to the throne. "Finally, you've arrived," Victor said with a smile. "How long has it been? The last time I saw you was at Rowan's funeral." One of his attendants answered that it had been 7 years. Victor smirked. "Time has passed, yet your beauty has not faded. Altaric's frozen rose, will you finally fall into my grasp this time?" he asked mockingly. Evelyn bowed politely and replied that it had indeed been a long time, and that it was regrettable they were meeting again under such disgraceful circumstances. Victor casually placed a hand on her shoulder and told her not to be so stiff. Cheerfully, he asked if her journey had been troublesome and suggested she come have some tea to warm herself. Evelyn immediately removed his hand, thanking him for the thought, but saying she would first go see His Majesty. Victor's smile vanished. He explained that his brother's illness had worsened and that the Emperor was not in the right state of mind to meet her. "He's been fighting his illness for a long time. I can't imagine how sensitive his temper might be." Then he smiled again, saying he worried it might cause misunderstanding. Evelyn smiled in return, thanking him for his concern and assuring him she would not trouble the Archduke. "I hope that's the case," Victor replied. Then he turned to Gilas, remarking that he was strong-willed when it came to rebellion and would not hesitate to throw himself into danger. "We've already given up trying to restrain him," he added. Evelyn glanced at Gilas when Victor asked if they had already greeted each other. "He was the hero who saved me when I was struggling in Vincewell," he said, adding that it had been difficult to pull him out of the mercenary ranks and into his unit. "This man is unmatched when it comes to chasing enemies to the very end. He still has his old habits, so I worry he may have been rude to you on the way here." Victor patted Gilas on the back. Evelyn smiled and replied that she had no idea he was once a mercenary, since his manner was quite gentlemanly. "While being escorted here, I felt as if I was walking on clouds," she said mockingly. "To think these two fine gentlemen will lead Altaric's future, I'm so moved I could cry." Just then, a servant hurried over, bowed, and announced that Evelyn had permission to enter. As Evelyn was about to step forward, Victor stopped her and moved closer. He gently placed his hands on her shoulders and told her she did not need to push herself so hard. He said she should not trouble herself with pride, but instead lean on him. Evelyn rolled her eyes as Victor reached for her hair, saying that the stains left by her past would be fine if he erased them. Her lady glared at him coldly and said that was exactly why he killed her husband. Victor's expression changed instantly. The smile vanished and shock filled his face. Evelyn opened the door and glanced back at him, smiling faintly as she said she was only joking. Both men stood there in silence, watching as she entered the Emperor's chamber. "Madam Winter, is that you?" the Emperor called out weakly from behind the sealed curtains of his bed, coughing heavily. Evelyn bowed at the doorway and replied that it was indeed her. The Emperor slowly reached out his pale hands, asking her to come closer. She approached, gently holding his hands and placing a soft kiss on them. "Please forgive this vassal's disloyalty for not meeting you sooner," she said in a gentle voice. Meanwhile, in another room, Victor was throwing objects in rage, cursing Evelyn for still acting arrogant as always. Gilas sat calmly, sipping his wine without paying Victor any attention at all. Victor ranted in frustration, saying he knew Rowan Winter was not dead. There was no way he could be. He was absolutely certain of it. Back in the chamber, His Majesty asked Evelyn if they had met privately like this since the funeral. She replied that they had not. The emperor sighed and praised her husband, saying he believed Rowan would be the one to lead Altaric to its greatest glory. What happened to him was truly unfortunate.
Victor is still as greedy as ever, His Majesty continued. Back in the academy days, Rowan always ranked first, and Victor saw him as an eyesore. He added that he was sure Victor was using threats to pull her under his control. Evelyn remained silent. His Majesty then warned her not to confront Victor alone, as she could not handle him by herself. Evelyn finally spoke, saying that although Rowan had disappeared, it did not mean the end of the Winter Duchy. His Majesty asked what she meant by that. Elsewhere, Victor continued his angry rant, telling Gilas they had to find that man. Even if it was only his corpse, he wanted to tear him apart in front of his arrogant wife. "Don't forget who made you reach this position," Victor snapped. Gilas replied calmly that he had not forgotten. Victor then ordered a servant to fetch Rowan Winter's portrait so he could show it to Gilas. Gilas interrupted, saying he already knew it. Victor turned sharply, asking how he could possibly know. "I've seen him before," Gilas answered. Victor rushed closer, demanding to know if they had any past connection because Gilas was starting to feel unfamiliar to him. Gilas stayed silent for a moment, then said the portrait had caught his eye in a way he could never forget. What Victor did not know was that Gilas himself had drawn that portrait. The man who painted her lady's wedding portrait was Gilas. There was clearly more to the story than anyone realized. Back in the chamber, Evelyn bowed deeply to His Majesty and declared that as long as she lived, Altaric's final barrier, the Winter Duchy, would remain strong and alive. "Please grant me a chance to redeem my disloyalty," her lady said firmly, adding that she would prove herself. At the same time, elsewhere, Gilas cutely vowed that he would find Rowan Winter no matter what. Immediately after Evelyn came out of the Emperor's chamber, Victor was already waiting outside. He looked at her closely and said that she did not look well. "Did it not go well?" he asked. The servant beside her answered instead, informing him that His Majesty had ordered Victor to escort her back to her mansion. "This is really an order for a widow who doesn't even have a carriage to return with? His Majesty is so indifferent," Victor said with a bow. Then he reached out his hand toward her. "I will take you back to your mansion." Evelyn stood still and looked at him, thinking to herself. Victor Altaric, though born as an illegitimate child of a concubine, joined the military and built his name with his own strength. Still not satisfied with only a dukedom, he desired the throne itself and had the power and ability to reach for it. However, in Altaric, lineage mattered deeply, making it hard for him to gain noble support. It was clear he wanted the Winter Duchy to secure his position. Seeing his outstretched hand, Evelyn asked calmly if they were at a festival, because anyone would think so from his posture. Victor smiled faintly and suggested they dance if that's how she felt, but Evelyn refused. Victor's hand suddenly closed around hers, his voice turning cold. "This will be the last time I reach out first." "Uncle!" A sharp voice rang out from behind them. Everyone turned to see Joshua Altaric, the first in line to the throne. "What do you think you are doing?" Joshua shouted angrily. "Surrounding an unarmed woman and threatening her? Are you not ashamed of the Altaric name?" Victor frowned and asked why His Highness was there, adding that it should be time for the academy semester. Gilas glared at him, while Joshua cleared his throat. "You do not need to worry about my school life." "Long time no see, madam." The silver-haired young man's cheeks were already red. Evelyn bowed politely. "It is an honor that your highness remembers me." Joshua said of course he did, and added that he had heard she was going through hardship. Victor interrupted, saying it was not something someone so young should interfere in. Evelyn smiled and said she heard Joshua was top of his class and about to graduate as valedictorian. "I am very proud of you, my prince," she said, taking his hands gently. Joshua blushed deeply. He told her he wished to become a great person like Duke Winter. Evelyn looked pleased. "My husband would be proud as well." Without hesitation, Evelyn asked Joshua for a favor. Joshua told her to ask for anything. She spoke softly, saying she had no carriage to return with and that she had been attacked by wolves on the way there, making her afraid to return alone. "Please allow me to ride in your royal carriage." Both Victor and Jill were shocked. "Of course you may, my lady," Joshua replied immediately. Evelyn thanked him, then before everyone's eyes, knelt and kissed his hand. She said she would never forget his kindness as long as Altaric stood. Joshua was stunned, blushing so hard it was clear to all that he adored her. Evelyn swore loyalty to him and the Winter Duchy. The guards murmured amongst themselves. It was not easy to crush a plan laid by the Archduke, yet she had done it so smoothly, like pouring mud over fire.
They watched closely, waiting for what would happen next. Jill sighed quietly. Joshua raised his voice and ordered them to prepare a carriage for Madam Winter. Victor stepped closer and sneered, saying she was bold for choosing to hold a child's hand instead of an old man's. Evelyn passed him by without stopping. It is better to do something useful than cling to a broken rope. Victor laughed in disbelief. You will regret this. You will, Evelyn replied calmly before disappearing. Outside the castle, Jill called out to her. There is a conflict area nearby. It is dangerous. I will escort you to Valhalden. Evelyn walked away and asked if he still wanted her to explain that the wolves she mentioned were his. Her eyes landed on the carriage. The step was high. Jill hurried over and held his hand to help her. She looked at him sharply and asked what he was planning. There is no hidden meaning, just a gentleman offering help. She stepped on it. Her heel snapped, and she nearly fell. Without his support, she would have hit the ground. Jill bowed and thanked her for her hard work, suggesting she rest at the mansion. Evelyn told him not to pretend concern. She said it disgusted him. Jill replied calmly that she seemed well recovered and that he was thankful to God. Evelyn felt confused by his behavior, but chose not to care. Her broken heel lay on the ground as she coldly told him they should never meet again. She slammed the carriage door shut. As the carriage left, a guard remarked that Colonel Gill looked strangely happy. Is that so? Jill answered quietly. It has to be. He watched the carriage fade into the distance. In his thoughts, he remembered her words. The hunt becomes interesting when the prey stops running. He was glad she was healthy, glad she loved her husband and child, glad she still had something to protect and something to lose. He was thankful for the love she once showed him, thankful as well for teaching him how painful and small love could be. She taught him everything, then left it all behind. Thank you, he thought coldly. Is this him finally giving up, or is this the moment he decides to show no mercy? 1 week later, her lady visited the failed Bridgeton railway site. Are you serious, matriarch? Isaac asked. He questioned whether her lady truly intended to rebuild the Bridgeton railway project. Evelyn remained silent, calmly flipping through the documents in her hands. The Bridgeton project was meant to replace a route that froze every winter and directly connect to Barrington, where a large mine operated. The plan was to expand trade by building a railroad over the sea. This agenda had been proposed and led by Royal Garden. Despite doubts and high expectations, the construction was completed. However, on the day of the opening ceremony, an explosion occurred. No one knew whether it was a design flaw or an enemy scheme. Even the former Duke failed. The risk is too great. There could be threats from neighboring countries, Isaac complained. Evelyn replied that the blueprint was perfect. She recalled her discussion with the Emperor. She had told him she would become Joshua's guardian, and the Emperor was pleased. He said it would greatly support Joshua, and he needed something hidden from the public eye. That was when Evelyn told His Majesty she would reveal the hidden power of water through the Bridgeton project. She told Isaac that the fate of their family depended on this decision. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. Access to civilians is restricted here. It was Gil and his men. They demanded to see her entry permit. Evelyn cursed him for being shameless enough to interfere in someone else's work. This is the first time I've seen an abandoned business like this, Gil said mockingly, telling her to leave. Is this not something your master should handle? Evelyn replied sharply. This is a national project entrusted to us by His Majesty. You are the one who should leave. Silence followed. Evelyn turned to Isaac and handed him the document, saying the data was a mess and that she needed the blueprint revised. Gil ordered his lieutenant to stay behind and immediately followed Evelyn, warning her that being alone here was dangerous. Evelyn thought to herself that after being suppressed by someone far different from the former Grand Duke, he would surely try to destroy Winter in some way. She sighed, knowing she had no time to care about such things. Standing beneath the tall bridge, she reminded herself that she must uncover the legacy Rowan left behind. She reached out and touched the structure. Memories flooded her mind, her husband working tirelessly on this very project. Her eyes grew heavy with sadness, but she steadied herself, imagining his gentle touch and hearing his voice tell her this project would become a light in dark times. On the other side, Gil noticed a metal rod falling from above. "Madam!" he shouted as he rushed forward. Evelyn saw it, but froze in shock. Gil grabbed her and dragged her away just in time as debris crashed down. "Are you all right?" he asked, supporting her on the ground. She said she was fine. Gil noticed her leg was stuck in an icy gap and warned her she could get frostbite. He tried to help her remove her shoe, but Evelyn suddenly snapped in anger, realizing how close and caring he was being. She pushed him away and told him not to touch her. It was quiet for a moment. Gil said her stubbornness could cost her toes, as her leg was clearly stuck. Evelyn replied that the only thing that needed to be cut was the shape of his ears. Before she realized it, Gil grabbed her arm and dragged her along, saying he would not let her freeze to death in a snowstorm. She shouted at him to stop, but he was just as stubborn as she was. He told her they would move until the storm ended. Evelyn had no choice but to follow. Ahead stood a wooden shelter. As soon as she saw it, her eyes widened. This was the place where they had been together 10 years ago. Inside, the shelter was worn and messy, nothing like before. She sat in a corner, glaring at him as he told her to wait patiently until the snow stopped. Gil suggested starting a fire, but wondered what could be used for fuel. "This place hasn't changed at all," he said. Evelyn replied coldly that she had erased every memory tied to this place. "Is that so?" he asked, lighting the fire and telling her to come closer. She hesitated. He asked if she wanted to stay wet and cold. "This feels familiar," she said. He replied that he was still a soldier. "A soldier?" she scoffed. "Just a kid who once played with a carving knife." Gil stepped closer, grabbed a strand of her hair, and inhaled its scent, saying it was all thanks to her. Evelyn shoved him away and told him to stop, saying she could walk home alone if needed. "If you leave without telling anyone, you'll freeze to death in your sleep," he warned. She replied that the Archduke would probably enjoy her death. Gil looked up at the roof and turned away, saying the place reminded him of the past. Evelyn looked at him confused. He asked if she truly loved Rowan Winter. Could she really manage such dangerous work alone? Did Rowan truly love her, or was he a man willing to put the woman he loved in danger? "Stop it," she shouted. She demanded to know why he never asked whether Rowan was alive. "Are you truly loyal to the Archduke? Was he a war hero cast away from the capital, or just pretending to be a guard?" She reached out, touched his face, and accused him of lacking faith in himself. Gil told her it was none of her business. She asked whether he really believed the Archduke would never abandon him. "It's not even pitiful," she said softly. "Is it a dog's nature to never bite its owner?" Gil grabbed her hands and replied that trampling others is the nature of a noble owner. Evelyn laughed, praising his improved speech, saying he argued like a brat. "Did you ask if I loved him?" she said. "Of course. A noble marriage is blessed by God." She leaned closer, daring him not to acknowledge it. Gil turned away toward the bed, then looked back at her. "Do you remember that day?" he asked. "Did you wear a white wedding dress and swear purity before the priest?" She told him to shut up. He accused her of lying at the altar with words full of false vows. Evelyn slapped him hard. When he continued, she slapped him again, calling him filthy and stuck in the past. "It's vulgar," she said. Gil sneered, touching his cheek, his face red from the slaps. He said he hadn't even shown her anything vulgar yet. He grabbed her, pulled her onto the bed, and they stared into each other's eyes. "I wonder how Rowan would feel seeing us like this," he said. Evelyn grabbed his neck, threatening that Rowan will find out in the afterlife. Gil calmly apologized, saying it was not yet time for him to die. Then he pulled a gun from his chest. Evelyn froze. "Between a noble couple," he said coldly, pointing the gun at her, "is there room for audacity to grow?" 10 years ago, after finishing the portrait, running away was the only thought in his mind. He believed that if he left quietly, everything would end there. But Evelyn appeared before him at that moment, blocking his path. She looked straight at him and told him not even to dare think about leaving her side without her permission. Back then, she grabbed him by his clothes and said to his face that he could never leave her. Her hands were shaking, her eyes filled with pain and despair. At that moment, she kissed him. It was not gentle, nor was it kind, but it made him breathe again. For the first time, it felt like air had returned to his lungs. She took control of his life in that instant, only to later push him away and urge him to leave with a freedom that felt cruel and empty. After losing her, he decided to live. But that decision was not born from hope. It was born from revenge. The only reason he continued breathing was to one day stand before her again. That was how he stepped into battle, and that was how he met Victor. He saved Victor's life during the chaos of war. When Victor asked for his name, he had none to give. He had no first name, no last name, nothing that belonged to him. Upon realizing this, Victor gave him a name, Gilas Black. That name became his identity. Gil chose to survive, even though he had been abandoned again and again. Survival itself became his goal. Not happiness, not peace, just reaching the end. Now, standing in the wooden shelter, pointing his gun at her lady, Gil thought to himself that one day he would make her face the muzzle of his gun willingly. Just then, far away in the forest, the other lieutenants heard a gunshot. When they turned toward the sound, they saw a flame rise into the air and immediately panicked. Henry asked nervously if they should report it to headquarters, but the other lieutenant stopped him, telling him not to panic and to prepare the carriage instead. It seemed he already knew where that gunshot came from. Colonel Gil was with her lady. Back at the Duchy of Winter, the mansion received a call. A servant answered and politely said that her lady was not available at the moment. The servant asked who was calling, and the voice on the other end said it seemed the gift had not yet arrived. At that moment, the door burst open. Isaac stumbled inside, his entire body covered in bruises. His clothes were torn and his face was pale. The maid screamed in shock. On the other end of the call, Victor laughed loudly, clearly amused. "It seems the present has arrived," he said cheerfully. "Where is Madam?" the maid shouted. Isaac, barely able to stand, told them that he had been attacked by masked men. They took all the documents, and now her lady was alone at the site. Right after that, messengers from the Grand Duke arrived. Everyone was shocked. It was clear that the Grand Duke had something important to announce. Meanwhile, back in the wooden shelter, Evelyn was stunned when she realized Gil had not shot her. Instead, he had fired at the roof. "It was only a single flare," he said calmly as he sat up. "Are you surprised?" Just then, the door opened and a lieutenant entered, saluting as he reported that the carriage had arrived. "Let's go. I'll take you back to your mansion." Evelyn glared at him and said coldly that she had lost her only chance to get rid of her. She told him it was a pity he would never get such a chance again. Gil sneered. "It seems the news hasn't reached you yet." Back at the mansion, Archduke Victor announced the news with delight. He mocked how unsociable their madam was and how she lost something very precious. The servants were shocked. Then came another announcement. In 15 days, a grand ball would be held. The host would be the new owner of the Black Mansion, Colonel Gilas Black. The messengers added that this was not an invitation that could be refused. It was an order. Back in the wooden shelter, Evelyn froze when Gil told her that the Grand Duke had granted him the territory. "I'm sure your husband would be very sad," Gil said mockingly. "As your new neighbor, I hope you will brighten up the ball." He reached out his hand. Evelyn took it as he helped her stand, her expression cold and unreadable. "I'm not looking forward to it." This is where this part of the story ends. If you love this story and you want us to continue, please comment the protagonist's name, Evelyn Winter.